All right. Hey, good morning, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Saturday, August 27th, 2022. This is your daily tropical update in a video form this morning. Thought I owed y'all a little more than the lackluster effort of the last few days. It's been a busy week, haven't had a lot of time to talk tropics, and there's not been a ton going on. We're looking at the Atlantic Basin here this morning, and we still do not have any active storms. It has been we are extending our streak into around 55, 56 days, I think, since the last named storm was Tropical Storm Colin on July 3rd. It has been an unbelievably quiet start to the Atlantic hurricane season after a little bit of activity here and there. We are in a La Nina year. We should have storms all over the place by late August. I mean, think about it. The last 2 years, we had Hurricane Laura made landfall today in 2020 with 150-mile-an-hour winds in southwest Louisiana. And last year, we were gearing up for the impact of Hurricane Ida. Ida was about 2 days from landfall, and we're also like 2 days from the anniversary of Katrina and some other big ones. And this is the Atlantic Basin here today, August 27th, and it's like it's just dead. We have two tropical waves that we're watching, and both of these could be a concern down the road. So the short version, if you don't want to sit through all this mess, yeah, the short version is basically we have a tropical wave here south of Hispaniola. This wave's making some noise as it moves into the Caribbean. This will be in the Caribbean, Western Caribbean, in a couple days, where conditions look a little more favorable for some development. And by middle to late next week, we could have something moving across Yucatan into the Gulf of Mexico, where some potential avenues for some sort of central to eastern or central to western Gulf of Mexico impacts are possible, or potentially just moving into Mexico, or potentially not developing at all. As we've seen a lot of these waves look like they're going to do something and then they just kind of fall flat. But we're going to talk about that. And then the other quick hit is that we have this big tropical mess out here in the central Atlantic Basin in the main development region. This is going to slowly move off to the west. It's going to be in the vicinity of the Antilles by the middle of next week, and then eventually could be up into the Bahamas by late next week or next weekend, Labor Day weekend, around the 3rd. And then from there, could potentially move into the eastern U.S., could turn away, could move south of Florida. There's a bunch of different potential avenues there, depending on what the pattern looks like. So we're going to talk about both these waves. But if you're looking for the short version, this wave could threaten the Gulf of Mexico late next week. This wave could threaten the eastern U.S. late next weekend or early the week after. So the bottom line is that the switch, quote unquote, could be about to flip on the hurricane season, and it would not be a surprise, again, given what kind of year we're in and how many storms we should have already seen by now. So if you want to stick around, we're going to talk about these waves in a little more detail. Again, Hurricane Center shows a 20% chance of development here for our Caribbean wave. That's where we'll start real quick. Trough axis here this morning south of Hispaniola, showing a little bit of thunderstorm activity, not a ton. We have these strong easterly winds pushing this wave off to the west, and these winds typically preclude convection, or sort of preclude organization rather, because it's so strong. It's hard for these waves to wrap around the backside, and there's a lot of dry air in this vicinity, and it's just not letting the wave get itself going very well. And without that thunderstorm activity, you don't get the pressure lower. The pressure's going to be pretty low because you got to spin those winds back to the west through a strong easterly flow. So this is unlikely to develop into much of anything over the next few days. Water vapor gives us some clues down the road, though. You have this upper level low over the Western Caribbean. This is backing away, and it's also pulling up some moisture from the deep tropics. And you can see this kind of wave here of envelope of moisture. So as our actual tropical wave here leaves that more hostile Eastern Caribbean, the Western Caribbean looks like it'll be a little more favorable and welcoming for development as we go into early next week and then the middle of next week. So the GFS brings this over into eventually into the Yucatan. Now the way the GFS does this is weird. The GFS actually takes the wave we have today and just kind of like makes it disappear by Monday, but then Tuesday, Wednesday, it shows another like wave coming up out of South America. Now, I don't know if it's kind of confusing, like some of the Kelvin wave surges we've seen out of South America from the cold snaps, or what it exactly is seeing here. But it could just see a general gyre of low pressure over Central America, and it could be pulling a disturbance up out of that. It's very possible, or maybe it sees another silent runner. I don't know what it's exactly seeing, but it kind of just pulls a disturbance out of nowhere. And I'm not saying that that's not possible, but what I'm saying is it's just a weird what the model is seeing. I think it's got the right answer, but maybe the wrong formula, if you will. It may just be the same disturbance moving slower. I don't know. But by Wednesday, it does show that some organization in the central Gulf or the the Western Caribbean, rather, moving towards the Gulf of Mexico. The Euro kind of sees the same thing. It just has a little more of a broad disturbance, but both models see that there's some potential for, at least some troughing, whatever. It looks like there's some kind of disturbance in there by the middle of next week. The Western Caribbean could be going. Now, from there, the Euro only runs at 240 hours on this run, but the GFS brings what looks like a potential hurricane, or at least a strong tropical storm, into the Yucatan Peninsula next Friday, so almost a week from today. And then next weekend spits out what could be a significant storm into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the runs kind of vary. This particular run today brings a hurricane into northern Mexico, not far from where that last invest moved in. But you can see previous runs bring in an even stronger storm. The run before that, it's a little bit further north. The run before that has like an intense hurricane moving towards South Texas. And the run before that wipes out Louisiana for the third time in 3 years. Um, we're not going to get too far into that part of the run because if you looked at the GFS, every pretty much run during hurricane season, some major U.S. city gets obliterated by a Category 6. So we're not going to play that game where we chase models too much, but just showing the GFS has been consistent that, some kind of storm is going to be in the Gulf of Mexico next weekend, and folks in the Gulf Coast should be, keeping an eye on what this wave does and what this pattern does, because the GFS has been talking about it for a while now. It's not just one spurious run. It's seeing the same thing over and over. So we're going to keep an eye on that. The other thing is we'll have to see is how strong the ridge is over the eastern and central U.S. As we go into next week, the ridge pattern is expected to build pretty significantly by the end of next week. A much larger, stronger late summer ridge or early fall ridge is forecast to build into the eastern U.S. and the central U.S. So is this ridge strong enough to push anything to the south? Is the ridge weaker? On previous runs, you've had a bit weaker ridge, and you see the weaker ridge here is allowing the storm to come further north, where in the last couple runs, the ridge gets stronger, and you can see the storm conversely gets pushed further away from the eastern U.S. and more into Mexico. And that's even if there's a storm there at all, which is even a question. So we're just kind of following the models and kind of showing you some potential outcomes, but I think the potential for some Western Caribbean development next week is possible. We'll see what comes out and where it goes from there. I wouldn't be stressing about it too much. Your other wave today is a tropical wave, part of the monsoon trough. Big mess out here located in the central Atlantic. You have your monsoon trough winds coming out of the southwest. You've got your kind of easterlies coming out of this direction. And within that, you got two little lows that are embedded within it. And these two little lows here are kind of doing their thing this morning. You have some rotation up under this thunderstorm complex, and you have another more broadly, vigorously rotating area of low pressure here. Now, the models don't see this as much. This could be dying off in the dry air. So this might become your more dominant low pressure center eventually. The system overall is struggling with dry air. Again, that Saharan air layer is still present in that wave breaking sort of pattern that brings that dry air down, still impacting even this wave. But it's big, it's broad, and these waves don't just fall over and die. I mean, these waves, even in the face of dry air and some shear and stuff, can persist for several days. So I think that's what we're going to see is this wave generally is going to creep off to the west. Now, this isn't going to be flying. This isn't like your main development this region this time of year where the waves run 20, 25 miles an hour. Just cruise through here. I mean, this thing's going to kind of crawl along at about 10, 12 miles an hour. But eventually, by the middle of next week, we think this is going to work up towards the Lesser Antilles. Maybe as an organized system, maybe just as a big, broad mess of a wave. GFS shows this pretty well. It shows a little more organization than the wave probably has today, but regardless of the Euro and GFS carry this pretty well. I like that like two more storms come off Africa and they're both already developed. Just the GFS this time of year is a riot. So ignore all this other crap. We're only looking at this wave right here. This shows us moving towards the upper Antilles. I think like Barbados, the Virgin Islands. Areas like that. 12Z on Friday morning. So this is Friday morning time frame, about 6 days from now. The wave is somewhere in this region. The GFS, it's kind of developed. The European is, I think, only goes to 240. So yeah, the European's still back on Wednesday, but regardless of, it does show the same thing, just on a bit longer of a time scale. So GFS moves it on to here. What we go from here? Well, the GFS brings us up towards the Bahamas by Saturday and Sunday. It brings us in the vicinity of the Bahamas. Now the European does the same thing. This is the European model showing us the same thing on a different website that goes further out. See, the Euro does the same thing. Friday it has it in the vicinity of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and then you go into Saturday, Sunday time frame. It pulls us up into the Bahamas as well. Both models do show an organized, pretty healthy tropical storm or a hurricane. So something we're going to have to watch carefully. From there, the questions sort of change. The overall pattern environment looks good. There's going to be the dry air is going to be present somewhat in this area, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a horribly detrimental thing. And wind shear looks light. The GFS doesn't show the wind shear very well because it also thinks there's another hurricane over here. If there is, then this is what it'll look like, but it's maybe not the most likely thing. But overall, I think the pattern is pretty lazy. You don't have any big upper level troughs or tuts or anything to slow it down. So it looks like wind shear and warm water are going to be favorable. Dry air is going to be marginal, but just dry air without any other help doesn't always hurt these storms that much, especially if you're bringing a decently well developed tropical storm or hurricane north of Hispaniola, north of Puerto Rico. It'll probably have enough of an environment to strengthen is the basic idea here. But where does it go from there? Well, the GFS eventually shows us recurving off the U.S. East Coast. Now, remember, we're talking about 9 days from now. We're talking about 9-10 days. This is Monday of the Labor Day weekend. This is after the Labor Day weekend, so we're pretty far down the road here. This is about the edge of where you want to even remotely look at these models. But in both cases, it shows that high pressure may protect the U.S. East Coast enough. The question is going to be, does this have enough room to escape out to sea, or is it going to be blocked? Because like the GFS here shows a high pressure cell over the eastern U.S., high pressure cell offshore, and there's a break right here, and the storm follows that break. But say this is a more uniform high and stronger, the storm will have to go to the west. It won't have a choice, or it'll just kind of stall, kind of like what Dorian did a few years ago, where it'll just come up here and just sit and then eventually go away. Euro shows kind of the same thing in a little bit different light. European shows us moving up right into the Bahamas, and then it shows kind of the same story. Very strong high cell over the southeast U.S., which is kind of blocking the storm from getting into the eastern U.S. And eventually, it doesn't show that break the GFS had. It kind of just shows this big lazy high. It basically just shows like this high just all over it, and it just kind of hangs out, and then eventually it would turn out to sea next time there was a break in the ridge. So both solutions are possible. Again, we're kind of over our skis already because we're looking at the 240-hour runs of these models. I don't want to even say right now there's going to be a hurricane at the end of next weekend in the Bahamas. I mean, that's even a bit of a stretch at the moment with the way this season's underachieved. But I just want to show that the computer models do start developing this sometime in the middle of next week, and by late next week, it shows a potentially decently developed tropical storm or potentially a hurricane moving either into the northern Antilles, your Greater Antilles, your Hispaniola, Puerto Rico area, or just north of that. And anything that gets in that region is a threat to the eastern U.S. That's Florida, that's the Carolinas, Georgia. I mean, it threatens anyone in this region. But to what degree, obviously, remains to be seen when the storm's here. Is the high pressure going to block it from getting into the U.S.? Is it going to be weak enough to escape the sea? Is it going to be stronger in more position here, which would take the storm further down to the south, so potentially the Keys, South Florida, maybe in the Gulf of Mexico. And then, of course, you'll have the other storm that could also be there at this time. You got a lot coming up, basically, is the moral of the story here. No specific threats. No one should be panicking. No one should be running for the hills, but you should be getting prepared if you haven't already. You should go get your supplies. Make sure you have your plan. Make sure you know what you're going to do, because by next weekend, things could look a lot different than this big dead satellite picture you see right now. So just want to let everybody know that switch could flip. We got two things to watch. We're going to monitor it throughout the week. I'll make sure to keep the updates going. I'll do my best to get them out, and we're going to get it figured out, guys. So that's what I got for you guys this morning on your topical update. As always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.